Hey everybody. A lot of the artwork I do involves using a program called Poser. Now what Poser does is it allows you to take a pre-existing model of a person, animal, dinosaur, whatever, and repose it, move its arms and legs around into a position that you want to use for your 3D render art. Now a lot of the times though, the skin that it comes with, I call it a texture, some applications may call it a shader, but for today I'll call it a texture. I don't like it sometimes and I want to redo it. So what I used to redo it is a program called ZBrush. Now ZBrush is a 3D sculpting application, but it also has the ability to paint models and repaint them as well. And so today I'm going to show you how I use ZBrush to retexture a model. So without further ado, let's get started. Okay, so I have loaded here the Carnotaurus model by Dino Raoul. Dino Raoul is a guy who makes these dinosaur models for Poser. His real name is Raoul Lunia. He's from Estonia, I believe. Does a pretty good job of making some really great models. If you ever want to look them up, you can always just go to renderosity.com, search for Dino Raoul, and you'll get a list, a very long list of models that he's made. However, while I like his models, for some reason I don't like the skin he gave to the Carnotaurus, the texture. So I'm going to retexture that today. Now a quick explanation of how textures work on these models. If you would imagine that the texture is like a piece of clothing, in order to make it to color it, you have to flatten it out, and it's kind of like taking that piece of clothing and removing all the seams and then laying the rest of what's left over as flat material. So, and this is what we call a UV map, and here is the UV map for the Carnotaurus that we're looking at. You can see the sort of flat thing. Now I could load this up in GIMP or Photoshop and actually manually paint the skin this way, but I'm going to do it in ZBrush because it's a lot more fun and it's 3D and more interactive. So what I'm going to do is export this model from Poser as a OBJ model, wavefront, and I don't need the ground, just the dinosaur. Just take the defaults when you're exporting it. And I've exported it before, but here it is on my desktop as carno.obj, and I'll just overwrite that. And then I'm going to go to ZBrush. Okay, so here we have ZBrush, and now when ZBrush first starts up, you have this file dialog thing. This is called the lightbox, and I've never used it for anything. Just turn it off by hitting the lightbox button. Now also, when you first load up, you get this border around the workspace. If you want to get rid of that, just left click on the zoom button here and drag down, and now you've got rid of that border. So now we're going to import the dinosaur model. We had that up here on the desktop as carno.obj. This doesn't really matter, yes or no. We're just repainting, so whatever, it doesn't make any difference. Now, any other 3D modeling application that would have loaded it in the workspace, but ZBrush is weird, and it loads it here in what it calls a tool palette. Now, the tools are actually objects, and if you ever get into using ZBrush, the tools are what they call brushes. It's some weird terminology, I know, but you just got to deal with it. Let's select our dinosaur. I'm going to left click and drag, and that puts our model on the screen. Now the next thing you need to do is hit this edit button. If you don't do that, then whenever you click out here, you suddenly start drawing more instances of the dinosaur and everything gets all messed up. If you get into this situation, just hold down the control button and hit N to clear the workspace, and left click and drag again to get your model. Now if I click edit here, we're in edit mode, and if I click and drag outside the model, he turns in various directions. If I hold down the Alt button and then click and drag, I can move him around. And if I hold down the Alt button, left click with the mouse, let go of the Alt button, but keep the left click down on the mouse, and then I can move left or right to zoom in. and out. ZBrush's controls are really strange, but if you get used to them, it's not so bad. So anyway, we've imported the model, and the model already had a UV map applied to it, as I showed you a few minutes ago. Stay away from this thing here. This is for creating a new UV map, and it'll mess everything up. So do not bother with that. But if you do want to just see the UV map, you can open this texture part of the menu here, create, and new from Polypaint, and you'll see here's our UV map. ZBrush inverts it for some reason, just another one of its quirks. It'll fix it when you export it though. However, since we created a texture, we will need to turn it off, otherwise we're not going to see our painting. Now, right now you see this thing Z-add is highlighted. That puts us in sculpt mode, so if we left click and drag over the dinosaur, it changes the shape, and we don't really want that right now. So we'll undo that, hold down the control button and hit Z. And let's turn this off sculpt mode and hit RGB here, which will change, which puts us in paint mode. Okay, so before we start painting, I'm going to change the material. It has this base red material, like a reddish clay. It's not really good for painting on, so I'm going to change it to the basic material. And we'll zoom in just a little bit. Now I'm going to show you something here real quick. I'm going to pick a color. We'll just go with sort of a medium red. And you see the whole model changes. That's because we haven't given it any color yet, and it's just kind of go with whatever this is. So if you want to avoid this kind of changing at the beginning, just pick a kind of a base color, and that's good enough. Go up here to the color menu and hit fill object. And now when I change this, the model doesn't change colors every time I pick a new color. Let me just pick a bright red here, and now that I've changed the brush color red, if I left click and drag, you see it starts painting the model red. Now, right now we have the original resolution, which isn't very much of a high resolution, and if I go with a small brush here, now to change brush sizes while we're at it, you just tap the S button and this little drag pop-up appears. Just left click and drag to the right to make it bigger and to the left to make it smaller. So right now I have a pretty small brush, and you'll see here as I drag across the dinosaur's body how it's only coloring these points. These are the vertices that it's passing over. And because our model is sort of low resolution right now, it's not painting it very well. So I'm going to undo the last couple of brush strokes I did. And I'm going to go up here to geometry, and I'm going to increase the density of the dinosaur's geometry. So I'll just tap the divide button a couple of times. And now if I drag this across, it looks a lot finer. Let's go one more division. Yeah, that's good right there. So yeah, so when you're doing this, you kind of need to get up to a higher resolution. It might strain your computer a little bit. And you can see here when I click and start to rotate, it drops to a lower resolution so that the graphics adapter can catch up. Okay, so we added a base coat to this, but it's not a great base to really paint on. So I'm going to pick a more of a brownish color, and I'm going to change the brush up here. Instead of this stroke, which is just like a typical paintbrush, and freehand is kind of the same thing, it's just a little bit more fluid, I'm going to pick the spray paint. Now let's increase the size of the brush here. And you see that doesn't look very good. It's spraying, but it's putting down too much. So what we need to do is apply an alpha also, and this will it's kind of like putting a filter on your airbrush. And I'm just going to pick the one that looks like dots. And now if I drag across it, you see it looks much better. Now you also see that I'm not just getting the color that I selected, but kind of a range of colors, from a light brown to a dark brown. If you want to reduce that a little bit, you can go up here to the brush menu and hit stroke, and you'll see this little thing here that says color. That's 0.5. If I put it down to, let's say, about 0.15 instead, my color is a lot more even. So now I'm just going to cover the whole dinosaur with this brownish coat. Now this is because it's a little bit more like a spray paintish coat. It's not quite so even and solid. And it's going to make a much better texture. Now his head's really dense with polygons, so you have to go over that a little bit more. And you'll see here that I've only done one side of him. If you want to save some time, you can tap the X. Oops. You can tap the X button, and that puts it in symmetry mode. So you see how you have the dot on both sides here. So now if I spray paint on one side, it appears on the other. So let's go over to this side and color it all in. Then it only take half the time to do the painting. Now I'm just going to do this real quick because I don't want to spend too much time just having you watch me spray paint color down on this guy. Let's get those feet. Okay, now that's a bit better of a base. You know, it's not such a solid color. It looks like I colored it with a crayon in a kid's coloring book. So the next thing I want to do is give him kind of a lighter belly here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use what's called masking, because I don't want to. Let's go with a light color here for a second. I don't want to be coloring this and having the white go all the way up into his body here. I just want it on his belly. So with masking, I hold down the control button and then left click with the mouse and drag, and you see it kind of get this darker area here. Now if I were to try to spray paint, you see the mask protects whatever it's covered. Now right now it's covering exactly the wrong thing. I want it to be the belly that's white and the body that stays brown. So let's undo that. To reverse the mask, all you do is you hold down the control button and then outside of the model just click once. And now I've reversed it, and I could just paint there without affecting the body. But first let's get that mask done all the way. So I'll reverse it back, hold down the control key, click and drag. I want some of the inside of his leg too. Smaller brush. Now, if at any point you kind of want to zoom out and have a look at the whole thing, just tap the F key, and that'll kind of frame everything so that you can see everything all at once. And also, if you start getting kind of turned around and twisted, if you hold down the Shift key while you're rotating, it snaps to orthogonal views. So I've snapped to the side, I can snap to the top, snap to the bottom. Anyway, let's finish this mask here. Now I'm not too concerned about painting all the spikes and stuff, and that's just because I know this model, and it actually has material groups, and so when we actually go back into Poser, we won't change those material groups for the spikes and stuff. We'll leave them what Dino will have them originally as, and we'll just change the major skin. And you'll see that in a bit. Go a little bit smaller for this. Get that under his jaw. All right, so now we'll reverse the mask. Sorry. And then I'll pick a brighter color. That white was a little bit too white. We'll go with more of an off-white. Increase the size of our brush and spray that in. Oh, that looks good. missed a spot there. Hit that F button again, zoom out. Alright, so now I want a little bit brighter still, right up the center, so we'll go with more of a white. That's a bit too harsh of a contrast. So if I want to lessen it a bit, I can also go up here and change the intensity of the color that's being laid down. We'll change it down to about a third of what it is. Now it kind of works a little bit nicer, kind of blends in a little bit better, makes that more subtle change. Don't want to go too far down on the tail there. And so now if I turn the mask off, to do that I just hold down the control key, click, and I drag a little square here and then let go and the mask disappears. And now our Carnotaurus is looking pretty good. I think up here I'm going to go with a kind of darken the top a little bit. So go with a really dark color. And we're still down at about 1/3 of the intensity, so it's not too harsh of a change. We'll just darken the top of him a little bit. I'll go into the head and work a little closer in a second. Let's make his tail dark too. Alright. And the top of his leg. This would kind of be the places where maybe the sun hits him and he needs a little bit more of a darker color to protect his skin. Okay, now here on the head I want to get some detail, so I'm going to go with a real small brush, get my intensity back up to around 70-ish%. Just kind of go around where these outlines are. And get the top of his head. And maybe where you have sort of these indentations, let's go with a lighter color. It's a little bit too strong. Control Z to undo. Let's reduce the intensity. Now you see here that little red line that appears for just a second before the color starts getting laid down. That's the lazy brush, and that's made for it's so you can draw things a little straighter. You can turn that off and your color will go down a bit more quickly. You go up here, you click the stroke menu, lazy mouse, and turn that off. And now I can kind of get in that spot a little easier. That's still a little bit too harsh, so let's reduce that intensity way down to like 10. I'm sorry, I'm doing Z intensity, that's why. The RGB intensity down to like 10. There we go, it's not quite so heavy there. Alright, show you another kind of brush real quick. So we've been using the spray brush, but now I'm going to use the drag rack. And the drag rack, you left click with the mouse and drag, and you can see here, since I have the intensity turned down, you don't see very well. Let's turn that back up to 100% for now. You can see it sort of drags out your alpha on the surface of the model. No, I don't really know if I want an orange polka dot dinosaur. Let's see if we can add some stripes maybe. So, whoops, don't want to do that. Let's go to alpha, and we'll pick this alpha here. It looks a little bit more like stripes, and do the drag rect, and get these kind of a nice tiger stripe effect here. Put some on his legs. And going down his tail. And all I'm doing is just clicking and dragging, and that's one of the alphas that comes with ZBrush. You can also load new ones if you go looking around the internet. But for today, we'll just use some of the defaults. Let's return it more horizontal as we get down his leg. Alright, and I think that's all I want to do in ZBrush. So, now here comes the next part, and this gets pretty difficult. This will be exporting it back to Poser. So to do that, there's some things you have to do just sort of in the perfect order. First thing we have to do is go to our geometry menu here and go back down to our lowest geometry. Now you see our we've gone back to these kind of highlighted, just these very loose vertices, but ZBrush still remembers what it looks like at the high rate. So if I go to the texture map and then I do create new from polypaint, actually that's not right. Let's go back up to the high geometry. And it still looks kind of loose because now we're looking at the texture, not the painting. So go back down to texture map, new from polypaint again, and there we go. So now if I go back to the geometry and reduce it, we get that loose geometry, but we get the detailed painting, and that's what we want to export. So we reduce the geometry back to what we imported, and now we go and export, and we'll call this Carno Fixed, and it exports it pretty quickly because it's a low resolution model. Now if I go and look at my desktop, you'll see here the Carno Fixed OBJ, an MTL, and now we have a bitmap. If I open the bitmap, you'll see we've created a new UV map that we painted using ZBrush. So now we can go back into Poser and use this for the dinosaur's texture. Alright, so we're going to bring back up Poser here, and you can see we still have the default texture that came with the Carnotaurus, and we want to change that. So we'll go to the material room, and you'll see here that there's a whole bunch of material groups. And the only one we really care about is the skin. So I'll select that, and what you want to change, you can see these various texture nodes and stuff here. The one that you're worried about is the diffuse color, and that's the actual color, the texture of the item. And you can see here it comes from an image, and we're going to change that from the old Carnotaurus DRC2. We're going to go to the desktop where we had saved our new one, and there it is. Pick Carno Fixed and OK, and you can see we have our new texture here. So go back over to here, and we can just give the dinosaur a quick pose of some sort. I'm just demonstrating right now, so I don't have to be too perfect about it. And then we can just render. Let's pull some lights around so these a little bit better illuminated to show our texture. Alright, and render. You can see here I've tested a few other renders before. Alright, and you can see that it looks even better now that there's a bump map showing through. You can see down here it's kind of got a rough look along his belly and some sort of scaly type rough look along his skin here. So that looks pretty good. Can always mess with it, maybe make it a little bit lighter. But anyway, so that's it for today. Don't forget to check out my blog, introvertartist.com, and here I share tips with you on how to make art and how to sell it online, and there's also a link here to my gallery. So thanks everybody, good night.